Hello, everybody. I'm Mike with Abnormal Investigations. I have Leanne here, and she's going to share some of her encounters with us today. We're doing a pre recorded interview, and I'm going to go ahead and let her start with her stories. And then, if we have any questions, we'll jump in and ask her questions. But other than that, Leanne, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, my name is Leanne. I live in Northeast Kansas, and got pretty much 48 years worth of Bigfoot encounters. But let's start with the very first thing that introduced me to Bigfoot. We were out mushroom hunting, and we come across the trackway, and one of our dear friends that was with us, part of the local indigenous tribes, was shook because she had heard about them all of her life, and here she was in her 30s and seeing tracks, and that got stuck in my mind that this was significant. And then a few days later, her and my mom set me down to talk about Bigfoot. And because of that talk, I always just consider them part of the normal animal wildlife around. Not, never taught to be afraid or anything like that. So my early encounters were not scary to me, except for one night there was, and it's the first time I ever know that it was them a giant cat was attacking a cow giving birth. That sound that they make when cows are in distress, but this had more to it. And that kind of made me wonder. It's kind of funny, my stepdad jumped out of bed wearing what most men wear to bed and just jumped in his boots and ran outside with the shotgun. And by the time he got over to the area they were at, they had bailed over the fence, or some had bailed over and one crushed it down to the full height of the hog wire down to the ground, and we had 3 rows of hog wire on top of that. And on T-posts, when you get those U-hooks on there, it's really hard to move that barbed wire. We was able to smash it down halfway down the T-post.
Right.
They were raiding our pear tree. We had an ancient pear tree by our chicken pen, and no kidding, not at all joking, softball size pears.
Oh,
Huge.
wow.
We had other fruit trees that they ate from. We were constantly flying tracks in that area because we had to drag the garden hose from one water trough to the other. So where the fruit trees were, the ground was always soft. So tracks there the entire 10 years we lived in Atchison. Um, but it wasn't just the sound that night that bothered me. I had my face pressed to the screen trying to look outside, see what was going on. And a big old hand came up and smacked the screen.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I couldn't actually see the creature because it was down the flat wall of the house. So unless I stuck my head all the way through the screen, I couldn't see it. But yeah, it smacked that screen. And so that's the first time that I ever felt any fear of them.
Right.
Knowing they could reach that high. Our house that we lived in was built in 1835 by a wealthy gentleman that had a connection to the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad. And the ceilings back then, they built those 10-foot high ceilings inside. So I was on the second story of that house with those extraordinarily high ceilings. So whatever hit the window had to be at least 10 feet tall, probably. I don't know, they'll have a good proportion to guess how much arm they have over their head like we do. We know our reach pretty much. But a creature like that, who knows?
Right.
So that was the first time I kind of got kind of wonky on them. We lived in Atchison, which is north of Kansas City, for 10 years. And that entire time we were there, we had things happen. Like one Christmas season, my stepdad's daughter from former marriage was staying with us for Christmas, and myself, her, and my mom were just up chatting into the wee hours. When something, this is an old house, no central air, so it was all window units. Something hit the air conditioner hard enough to knock out some of that glazing on the windows above this air conditioner. It hit it hard.
Wow.
The tracks that were there were snowed over a bit because it was snowing that night, but from the top of where it sunk down in, that was an 18-inch track, heel to toe. Even with the snow in it, you could see it, how long it was. It messed up the width of it a little bit, but there was a trackway around the house that night. One of the most reoccurring themes that happened was something getting into our feed room. The feed room had two doors, one that faced out into the driveway parking area, which was pretty large compared to a normal house. I don't know, I do know, but I don't know why the former owners had a driveway that big, but you could park like 5 cars wide in it. So anyway, there was a security light on the front door of the feed room, but not the back. And the back door of the feed room was actually in the middle of the barn. You had to come into what we called the common area for the horses and the cows just to get out of the weather. And then that led into another room, which is where we stored our hay for the most part. Square bales in there, our round bales were outside, but you had to come through 2 areas to get to the back door of the feed room, and something was opening that feed room and helping itself to the horse feed, because we had sweet feed. I think the molasses were the attractant on it. Right. And it was an old kind of way that, farmers kept their doors closed, just a small 1x2 with a nail driven through it that you would twist one way to open and twist one way to close. And it was open. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see any other animal being able to do that. Not to mention the feed was in 55-gallon barrels. And a possum's not going to be able to lift that lid up to get into that feed. And if there is one out there that could, I don't want to meet it. Yeah. One particular winter, it was one of the most bitterly cold winters that I can remember for my entire life. It was so cold. And some of the hay was taken. And you could see where they carried it out and then over the fence into the snow. Because all the, you carry hay and you get stuff dropping off of it constantly. And so they took a couple of bales of hay to pad their winter home, I'm guessing. This is where I lived next to the Girl Scout camp when I was in Atchison, Kansas. Okay. And there are several caves all over that area. But I know in particular of a smallish one that was in the Girl Scout camp itself. And it was a straight shot almost from the back of our barn over the fence and down into that area that went to that cave. So being a kid, we left Atchison when I was 16. Being a kid, I didn't know any better than to feed them. I got tired of them messing up my feed room, so I started hanging a bucket on the fence with feed in it. And they would take the bucket and they would bring it back empty.
Uh-huh.
So it was almost like adding another animal to the chores. The whole time we lived up there, we would find trackways in our garden, like I said, around the fruit trees. But I never actually saw one directly. I think I caught the back of one time, but it hunkered down into the tall weeds, and I was smart enough not to approach an animal that I didn't know. So I just kind of backed out of there and went home, because I spent a lot of time in that Girl Scout camp when it wasn't in use. I mean, it was literally part of my backyard almost. And it had trails, and I was a Girl Scout myself, so I liked being over there. And I especially liked riding my horse over there.
Right.
And I don't know what he saw, what he smelled, or what he heard, but he spun around and took off running. And to get into the Girl Scout camp, on foot, I could cross the fence and just walk through the weeds and go in there. But with him, the only way in there was the main gated entrance, and that was on top of the levee. This area also had watershed dam that levee was for, because the city had flooded so bad back in 1951 and it almost covered the entire city, because Atchison sits right next to the Missouri River.
Right.
My horse sensed something and took off running. I could not stop him. I could not slow him. All I could do was get a really good grip and hang on for the ride. And he cleared a 6-foot gate that was on that levee. I've never seen him jump like that. Never. And he never didn't respond to my commands. I mean, I raised him from the time he was a little less than a yearling up to the point where I could ride him. I think he was 5 years old at the time. And when we got back that short distance to the house by going down the actual driveway of the Girl Scout camp, and that little piece of road before our driveway started, and that small amount, it wasn't probably even a quarter mile from where he jumped the gate to where we were home at the barn, and he was completely lathered at that point, which physiologically he shouldn't have been that sweaty, or he was in full panic. But as soon as we got back to the barn and the other horses in his herd, he was able to calm down, but he stood there and just shook. So I really don't know, because I wasn't looking backwards, what happened. If it was chasing us or I don't know. But that was another kind of spooky encounter. But at first I put it up to a bobcat, because there were bobcats on that Girl Scout camp. But I don't know that he would react that way to a bobcat.
And you had caves at the Girl Scout camp also?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because the Girl Scout camp here in Oklahoma, when I investigated it also had caves. So that was interesting.
There was at least one, and maybe another one. I could see like around an archway just past the line of property for the Girl Scout camp that went into an apple orchard behind that. I mean, talk about having all the food they ever wanted. We had fruit trees, we had a garden. The apple orchard was just on the other side of the Girl Scout camp, and they grew, almost all year round, because your blackberries and raspberries and stuff were really early. And then you had peaches and apricots in the middle, and then the hard fruits, the apples and the pears at the end. And he grew millet, like the birdseed millet.
Uh-huh.
That was a winter crop, so there was always food in that orchard for them. So I don't think they moved up and down that much. There was also a decent sized creek there, and we had crazy stories on the farm, but you know how things go on the farm. We had a sow that just was determined to be in the creek during the day, during summer. And she fence so she could get over it and go down to the creek. And she also taught her piglets to go down there. Well, we definitely lost a piglet down there in the creek that we heard screaming, wasn't that far away, because it was literally just like our pasture driveway for the Girl Scout camp creek. And so we go running down there, and there's no sign of that pig anywhere. No sign of it ever showing up. I never found any bones, anything from that piglet. So I think it got one of the piglets.
Right.
But the fact that we responded so quick, I wonder if that's why they never took another one. I don't know. There's so much we don't know, or what they think, or how they think. And it never touched the pigs after that. We had trouble with chickens and geese and ducks being taken until we ran hot wire around the outside of the pens. Put 4 strands of hot wire on there, about 2 feet apart. And after that, no chickens or ducks or anything went missing because they were all locked in at night. I know our cows were particularly not interested, and our pasture was divided into 2 pastures with a walkway in the back where we could walk them out on one side, let it grow up, rotate them like that. But the cows got to the point they didn't want to go to the other side at all.
So they knew something was over there, huh?
Exactly. I mean, that side, that walkway was literally up against the property line of the Girl Scout camp, and almost the whole width of our property up there, we had 10 acres. And they just wouldn't go over there, and then they started losing weight because they were, not being able to graze good green grass when they're supposed to be fattening up. So I don't know. We heard them in distress a couple times when the windows were open in the summer, but never could find anything.
Right.
Yeah. So after we lived there for 10 years, and then our house burnt down. And by then, grandkids were coming along. My older siblings were having kids, and Mom wanted to be closer, so we moved back down to our hometown area. And when we moved out here in 1986, never had a sign of anything going on whatsoever. And I lived here from 86 to 91 when I graduated from nursing school, and then I moved to town, which I hated. But my brother, who has also had encounters, and one encounter he won't even talk about, but other people have, so I have a good idea of what happened. There's a set of caves down here, of course, also had. Most of the caves are used for cold storage, and for the railroad tracks go right in front of it, so they will drop off cargo, frozen cargo, goes into the caves, and then the local truckers around here would take it to different grocery stores and distributors from there. But there's one cave that the front collapsed on. And so that cave was taken out of use. They had no choice to take it out of use. But it's kind of weird that they were using it anyway, because there's a lake inside that cave. There's an opening in the back of where the cave comes out of the ground that people snuck into, high schoolers, kids, partying in there around that lake. I mean, I guess the top of it was so tall they could even do bonfires inside with no risk of smoke being an issue.
Right.
Well, one night they saw something grabbed someone and roughed him up really bad. Didn't actually kill him, but changed his life forever. And I knew that guy because he was one of my brother's friends. But there's 9 years difference between me and the next sibling. So I didn't know him that well. I was a little kid, but I knew him.
Right.
And it took probably 2.5 weeks for all the bruising to disappear off his face. Broke one of his legs. From what I understand, I just picked him up and swung him like a lariat over his head, like he was going to lasso somebody with him. So nobody went back there again. I myself have never been in there. I've wanted to go in there, but I'm not willing to be flung around like a child's toy if they're still there.
Right.
There are signs everywhere to stay out of that place, more than you would expect. But those particular caves are, as the crow flies, maybe 4 miles from my house. But behind my house, it's changed course. We have a really big creek that is called Stranger Creek, and it would be a river in a lot of places. And it changed course. I don't know much about the history of it when that happened, but when it changed course, it exposed all the limestone back there, and there are caves back there. That is right behind my house, like 1/8 of a mile from my house. So I think that's why they're here, and they have access to a lot of food around here. I have fruit trees. My neighbors have fruit trees. There's lots and lots of walnuts around here. But just grow wild. We don't have like any pecans or anything like that, but we have lots and some hickory. We had a big hickory tree in Atchison as well. But I think that's where they're at, because I've seen them walking along the creek bed. By the time I was a teenager, our party spot was a bridge right down the road from my house.
Right.
And we were sitting there, and my best friend was like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." She's like getting hysterical. I'm like, what? And she pointed down into the creek bed, and there was one that had gone under the bridge and was walking down the edge of the creek, just lackadaisical, like not worried about us at all, it seemed.
Just kind of doing his own thing.
Just doing his own thing. And he's pretty big. I would say that was probably a minimum of 8 feet on that one.
Did he look at you guys or anything, or pay attention to you, or just?
He didn't, unless they had a really good peripheral vision, because his back was, by the time he crossed the bridge, under the bridge, his back was toward us. I never seen his shoulders turn. We know they can't turn their head that much because of their big necks, but I never see it turn its head. And it had to know we were up there. I mean, we were teenagers. We had the radio going. People were drinking their drinks and whatnot, and we weren't paying attention either. The only reason she was looking down there is because this was not too long after we moved down here. And she was just taking in the scene of being on the bridge with the water below and stuff when she saw it. And the water was really low that year. So there was literally, he could walk on the bank without putting his feet in the water. And I think that's why nobody detected him, is because he was silent in that mud or soft dirt. I wouldn't even call it mud. It had dried enough to be soft dirt. And she was just happened to be looking. And there he was. And she was like, oh my God, oh my God.
And he was a big one.
He was big. Not as big as the one that I saw, not this past winter, but the winter before. After the tornado took away our barn, it took away our place that we had put for the cats with some heat lights and stuff like that in an old stall, so that in the wintertime they could get in there and get some warmth. And they even had an air conditioner in there for when it got really bad in the summer. But when the barn got taken, we just built a heated cat house out here on our front porch. And sometimes the neighbors' dogs would come down here and mess with the cats and mess with that box. So I heard something, rustling around on the front porch, and I heard the cats take off running, because when they would run underneath our house, we have skirting around the house, they would hit that skirting hard enough to make it vibrate and make a sound. And I mean, they were fighting to get in that hole under the house. And so I go out there thinking I'm going to be running off these dogs. And I open the door and I hear something say, wah. Or I might not have seen him, but I turned my head to look, and 20 feet away, literally 20 feet away, standing right up against my husband's work truck, was this big, silver black Bigfoot. Had to be a male, had no breast, but I couldn't see it from the chest down. Its pecs were level with the top of that truck. And right behind it was the second house that we have on our property. And so I knew exactly where he hit on the eve of that house. So I know for sure that he was 8 foot, give or take 2 inches. I had that good a measurement for where he stood. And we stood there, made full eye contact with each other, maybe 30 seconds before my body's defense mechanism kicked in and said, we're not going to fight, we're going to flight. So I went right back in the door saying, nope, nope, nope. And I don't know how long he stayed out there. I didn't go back to look. I wish I would have thought to grab a camera, but when you see something that big and knowing what they're capable of doing that close to you, if that truck wouldn't have been between him and I, should have been to me in probably 3 steps or less.
Right.
So I wasn't taking any chances, and we have kind of a peaceful relationship here. It is funny though that my husband, who we'd been married, 13 years at the time, he laughed at me. He did not believe in Bigfoot whatsoever. So not too long after we moved out here, we were already moving into a drought, and we were hard hitting that drought maybe 2 years after we got here. And my horses had been blowing and snorting, and I walked out onto the back deck and was surprised that they weren't where they normally were. We had a security light down by the barn, so it lit up the whole lot down there. But the horses were staying up in the far northeast corner of the pasture. And I didn't understand why until I saw movement. And I look, and here come 2 of them out of the tree line, out of the dark, and walk up to the horse trough and start drinking. And they didn't lower their face to the water like most animals do. They used their hands to bring the water up to them.
Right.
So when I saw them, I ran into the house and I literally dragged my husband out of the shower and out on the back door. Thank God we live in the country. But there were still drinking. And I'm like, look, what do you see? And he says, I don't know what that is. I'm like, do you really not know, or are you just saying you don't know? Look. And he goes, I'm sorry, you were right. They're real. Those two were a female, definitely a female, because you could see her breast. And the other one was slightly smaller than her and was kind of turned at an angle to where, I don't know, I could have seen anything anyway, but I don't know what sex the other one was. But they were about 50 feet away because the hose that went to that water trough was a 50-foot hose, and it was pretty much straight from the faucet to the water trough. So, still pretty close, but they had no clue I was there until I ran back out through the door. And I think they knew we were outside at that point, because then they stopped drinking and walked away. They just walked right back into the tree line. And so that's my actual 3 good quality visuals, or 2.5, because I only saw the back of the one. But they do, on a routine basis, is they throw rocks about half the size of your fist or less onto our roof constantly. At one point, we had a small juvenile one that just loved to play on our roof. I think because we have 2 hedge trees that are so huge that they don't have spines anymore. It was going, up one tree, across the roof, down the tree, across the yard, up the tree, just doing laps in there. And when we spoke before and you asked about, do they ever talk, it reminded me of 2 things. One, our very first night out here, and it's not really talking, but we have a driveway, from the regular driveway going back to where the barn was. And I had my brother, when I moved back out here to the family farm, my brother was living in a camper on the property. And so I'd been down talking to him. And when I walked back up that drive and got between the porch of the house and the giant lilac bush right there, something growled at me. And it was loud enough to rumble my chest. My husband was inside the house with the TV on, and he heard it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was like, welcome back or something. I don't know. That scared me. As far as vocals go, that one scared me because the lilac bush was maybe 10 feet thick. It had to be that close to me.
Are they still around today?
They're still around today, yeah. They're still rolling around or throwing the rocks up on the roof. Sometimes I go outside to put scraps down for the cats and wait till the cats get there and eat before I come back in the house. And I've had pebbles thrown at me, like hardcore thrown pebbles that when they ricochet off the deck and hit the house or some of the railings on the deck or whatever, you can tell where it hit because it was so loud. And I think there's one that still watches through the window because I know one did for a while at least. I was actually in my husband's man cave. He's in his computer at that time. And I don't know what made me turn around. There wasn't a noise, I don't think, that made me turn around, but I turned around and there were finger pads on the window. And just the pad of the finger that I'm pretty sure was the thumb was about 2.5 inches long. Wow. Just the pad, yeah. And we have the one that I saw standing next to my husband's truck was black with silver, but the fingers were peach colored with rusty color hair around them. And the two I saw drinking out of the trough were auburn rusty colored. So we have both colors here. Like, I think they're both coming through my pasture at the same time. They must be together. I don't think you would have two different groups this close together, especially what happened last fall and kind of why I dropped out of being online as much, or at least chatting or commenting on videos, is because there was a massive fight between two Bigfoot between me and the end of the road, which is only about 3/4 of a mile. And every neighbor in between, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 5 people or groups of people living between me and the creek. And every one of those neighbors experienced the sounds too. I mean, you could hear trees crashing and loud bellows. And not the kind that you hear online, you know, the long, drawn out ones, almost like they're saying, I'm here, where are you? And the other one answers kind of back and forth. These were strictly challenge bellows, and they were absolutely, I don't want to say terrifying, but they were terrifying to, you know, it wasn't happening next to me. It was happening somewhere in the middle, but that they could do that. And some of those neighbors called the sheriff's department. Sheriff's department came out. Then game wardens come out. And then help from other agencies, including whoever is in charge of the black helicopter stuff that you hear going on. Because since I've been out here about 3 years ago, they started hunting these Bigfoot in these helicopters.
Oh, so you've seen the black helicopters?
Seen them. I've been warned not to talk about this stuff that happened here. I mean, it was right here. Don't want to be talking about that stuff. I've not only seen the black helicopters, I've heard fully automatic gunfire. And they're trying to blame it on the gun range that's near to here that people can use full auto weapons at. But I know where that is. I literally grew up as a child member of the club. So I've been in that gun club for my whole life, literally. I mean, it was a big joke that my dad got me a membership card right after I was born, like 2 months old. And it's been maintained ever since. So I know exactly where that gun range is and where that gunfire sound comes from when somebody's out there using their full auto. And it didn't happen that much, and it's sure not going to happen in the middle of the night. We're talking 2:37 a.m. I looked at the clock. 2:37 a.m. I had been hearing the helicopters.
So,
and then,
can you talk about who threatened you?
I'm sorry?
Can you talk about like who threatened you and told you not to talk about it?
They were kind of dressed like they were trying to portray they were the Kansas wildlife, but their uniform was sloppy. I mean, I guess they just didn't care. They figured people would just follow along, but I know what a game warden's patches and stuff look like, and they had the Kansas patch right, but the other patches on their uniform were not right. At least not for the game wardens around here, because our game wardens are bored as hell because you cannot go fishing anywhere around here without a game warden showing up. Period. They are always around. And so you get to know what that was, and it wasn't correct. I think it's, the federal government.
Right. And what did he say to you when he talked to you?
He said, nothing happened here. Nothing happened here. If anybody asks, they were out here for 3 days on foot, as well as the helicopters, which the helicopters are still coming around almost on a nightly basis. But it's like, if anybody asks what happened out here, nothing happened out here.
So are you, and you don't have to say, what part of Kansas are you in?
I have no problem saying, if you look on Kansas map in the northeast corner, you'll find Leavenworth County kind of in that characteristic makes it recognizable as Kansas, that little protuberance of the map that is the Missouri River, where it just follows the river. So anyway, in the northeast corner, you'll find Leavenworth County, and I'm in the southwest part of the county.
And that's pretty much all he told you, is nothing happened here?
Yeah. And when I asked, how are we supposed to explain it? You can't say nothing happened here when you have all this, excuse my language, shit broken and tore up, and fences torn out, and bloody fur on the fence. You tell somebody nothing happened, they're going to know you're lying. Right. It's not like the area this took place in isn't a well-visited area because of the creek, Stranger Creek, really good fishing out of that creek. People go in that area all the time. So they ripped out all the fencing down there.
Wow.
And they didn't put anything back, which is really weird.
That is very strange.
And the neighbors, the ones at the furthest end of the road up against the bridge, they have horses, so they had to put a fence in. And when they put the fence in, all of a sudden they put razor wire on top of that fence. Who puts razor wire where you have horses?
Somebody that wants to keep something out.
Exactly. So they ran a hot wire to keep the horse away from the razor wire.
Wow.
So, this is the same place that I saw the Bigfoot going under the bridge that night. And people think I'm nuts when I say I'm blessed that I only have Bigfoot.
Right.
But they're peaceful to us.
Right.
As long as we maintain our boundaries of each other, we coexist okay, just fine. My husband was bluff charged one time because he worked late that night. He was on call. He got in. He had to feed the horses. And it was well past dark when he went out there to feed the horses. He's had one of them belly crawling on him when he was outside for something else. You could see their eye shine from, like a foot and a half off the ground. And it was literally belly crawling his way.
I had something out here belly crawl at me also out in the field.
So, like when my horse died, I put it in the comments and people read about it. they literally decorated the grave. Flowers and stones that were arranged on there. A couple of them were little stacks of stones. A couple were spiral stones, like a teardrop shape.
Oh, wow.
And then lots of just, little piles of stones. And then they must have picked flowers all night long, because his entire grave in between those rocks was covered with flowers.
Wow.
Yeah. I used to hear him do a hello nicker after dark when there should have never been anybody in the pasture, so I don't know who he was talking to, but he was talking to somebody.
Wow.
Let's see. So many things have happened. After the tornado that happened in May of 2019, there used to be they've rebuilt it, so it's still there now, but there was a giant greenhouse nursery a few miles from us as the tornado went through. And as it went through that greenhouse, it picked up all those pots that all those plants were in and just swung them everywhere for miles. The tornado was on the ground for 32 miles. And we had those buckets everywhere. It's like, well, we'll clean them up tomorrow. And tomorrow came and all the buckets were sitting up against the backyard fence.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I believe that they understand our language.
Right.
I think they speak regular speech. I think they have their own language. And I think they're perfectly capable of learning our language, or at least know the meaning of it. I've never kind of bought into the telepathic part of it.
Right.
But it's possible. Maybe
Right.
that's how they learn our language. I don't know. I wish I would have not went back in the house that night and maybe tried to speak to it. But everything like that, when you're like, when I see one, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. That all goes out the window when they're standing right there.
Right. Yes. Okay, well, I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Oh, sure.
And I'm going to work on this, and I'll try to get this out just as soon as I can.
I'll be looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
All right.
And God bless everybody.
All right. God bless you too.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.